some kind of scrapbook of their life. Whether it's stories, whether it's photographs, they can draw pictures of things, happy things they remember. Now they might draw some sad things that they remember, but again, that's where you come in as the adults and to say, explain that to me. Tell me about it. Kids developmentally, when they've been abused, tend to act out. They don't, it's very rare that they respond like post-traumatic stress adults do. Post-traumatic stress adults tend to have nightmares, tend to have flashbacks, tend to have vivid recall, and they could be washing the dishes and that stuff keeps going through their head over and over and over again. Kids tend not to do that as much. Some do, but tend not to. What they tend to do is act out with other people what's happened to them. Children have this notion that if we act it out and keep acting it out, and then we have a different ending to the story, they somehow internally resolve it. That's what play therapy is about. If kids come in and they're angry, you just let them play until they end up tearing the head off the doll or whatever they do, because that's the way they work it out. I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and all the phone calls we got about kids were them building towers and knocking them down, and building towers and knocking them down. And parents were mortified. We got to bring our kids in for therapy. And we said, no, just let them do that. And eventually, after they do that enough, they're going to draw a picture, they're going to talk to you, something, but they've got to go through that process. And they did. It was just an interesting sidebar. That Bruce Willis movie where he's in the towers, what is it? The first Die Hard in the tower. The adults did the same thing. The rental of Die Hard after 9/11 went up 528%. Why? Because in the movie, Bruce Willis is in this tall building, the terrorists come in, and who wins at the end? Bruce Willis, and all the bad guys are dead. The adults were doing the very same thing, only very differently. Okay? So those are just some of the things that show up. Autonomy versus shame. Again, that 2-year-old needs to look and discover and all that kind of stuff. If you've got kids that didn't have that opportunity, they're stifled. Okay, what do you want to do for your science project? What do you want to do today? It feels like we have nothing. Or the other side of that is to do what everybody else wants to do. And that's where the peer pressure stuff is like really scary with this group of kids. Because if I don't have any particular feelings about what I'm supposed to do, and I'm so used to pleasing everybody around me, when I get into that group of peers, I'm going to please them. Okay? I want to see, let's see if there's anything else. 3 to 7, kids are magical thinkers, which means everything that happens is about them. So if they pull the dog's tail, and tomorrow the dog runs away, the child assumes it was because I pulled their tail yesterday. Everything's about them. If you're in a bad mood, just because you're in a bad mood, they're going to follow you around and try to figure out what they did. Okay. Now, think about that in terms of normal stage of development. Okay, that's normal. If we add on top of that abuse and neglect, you've got kids in that age group that have severe anxiety, that are really worried about pleasing everybody. that if they don't get 100 on the spelling test, they're not taking the spelling test. I don't know if you've got any of those kids in your, but you know, it's just amazing to me. And sometimes that's just normal. I got a 20-year-old that's like that. I don't know how she got like that, because I'm definitely not a perfectionist. But she's scared of her own shadow, because if she can't do it perfectly, and that's the genetic piece. Some kids just come out of the womb that way. But if you have a child like that, and then you have inappropriate expectations on top of that, and parental stuff on top of that, you've got kids that are really worried about who they are and how they perform. And they're going to do one of two things. They're going to work really, really hard, because that's their personality. I'm going to prove you wrong and I'm going to do it. Or they're going to opt out and do nothing. I've got a kid right now in 8th grade decided he's not going to school anymore. He's done. He's just done. He's not going to get on the bus anymore. He says, why? He said, I'd rather get yelled at home for not going to school than going to school and getting yelled at because I'm not getting good grades. Either way, I'm getting yelled at. I'm going to choose the way I'm getting yelled at. So he's going to stay home. That sounds logical to me. I don't know. You know, it makes sense. What you got to do then is work. You know, that's, even I don't know all the answers. I've tried everything. And go figure, Mom came in the other day and it's nachos. He'll go to school for nachos. After all that, nachos. So if he goes to school for a whole week, she goes out and buys some nachos. Whatever works. Got me. Okay. Let's see. Where are we going to look at here? Some of this other stuff you can read. Adolescence. Let's talk about adolescence for a minute. Adolescence is when a child figures out who they are. Erickson tends to stretch that age out for men a little longer, to about 28. And women, he does a little less. I don't know if that's fair or not. I suspect that's because women have children earlier and maybe are forced into adulthood faster. Now women aren't having children as young, but when Erickson was around, you know, women were having kids at 16, 17, 18. So women were forced into adulthood. So maybe that's the reason for it. Routinely in adolescence, what an adolescent does is they try stuff. They try it on and see if it fits. So we might have periods of, I know my daughter went through the goth period. Thank goodness, that only lasted for about a year. And she hung out with the goth kids and wore black and black. They just try stuff to see if it fits. They also look at family to see how that fits with them as well. And that's where sometimes abuse situations, it's difficult. Because I'm supposed to look at dad or mom and model myself, but I don't like them very much. I love them, but I don't like them because they've hurt me. So then who do I model myself after? Fortunately, at the Mustard Seed Ranch, we have good male and female role models. And we can look at these people and go, maybe I want to be like them. You know, what do I need to try? I don't know how it works here. I know with my kids, and when they were adolescents, everybody came to my house. Can they invite their friends out to the Mustard Seed Ranch? Can they do that? It's worth it. That's all I can say is it's worth it. I would rather have 20 teenagers in my house watching movies and eating my food and I can hear what, you don't interfere, but you get to hear what they're saying, and every once in a while you put your ear to the door, and but you know where everybody is. Again, I raised my kids in the inner city of Milwaukee, so we had drugs and gangs and violence and all kinds of stuff. They all came to my house. The colors and the guns were checked at the door, but that's a whole other story. But they were at my house, and so I didn't have to worry that my daughters were out on the street. Okay? Make opportunities for that as much as possible. Adolescents are social animals, and they're supposed to be social animals, so their job is to separate from you. Now that may seem really odd because they just got to you in some cases, but their job is to separate and to be with their peers. So your job is to find healthy ways for them to do that, whether that means inviting the kids over to your house, whether that means getting them into a church group or the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever. Your job is to figure out a way for them to leave. Yes?
Is it bad if they don't want to separate from them?
Not initially, because if we look at the stages of development, you may have kids that aren't in adolescence even though they're adolescent age. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So, the kids, what age group do you have?
9, 11, 12, 13.
Okay.
15.
If you read through on the stages of development, some of those stages are about purpose, gaining skills. Even though they're supposed to be at that further stage of development, they might not be there. They might be working on their skills. They might be working on their empathy and relationship, because they've got to do that first before they move on. Now what's interesting, although the stages of development go through a lifetime, if an adult comes into my office and they work really hard on therapy, they can come in, a 13-year-old, and in a couple of months they can catch up on all the stages of development. Okay? So it goes really fast. So what you might find is that kid who should be doing that and isn't, works for a little while on their stuff, and then all of a sudden, does a 360 on you and wants to be with their friends. All that signals is that you did your job right. Now, there are some disorders in children where they don't want to do that. Asperger's, any kind of autism, and kids can be really high level autistic. They can be really high level Asperger's. And if you ask them, have you ever had any really good friends? What happens with Asperger's and autism is that those younger stages, when kids just play together, you watch preschoolers and there's a bunch of toys and everybody plays. They're not really playing with each other, they're just all playing in a group. There's no really sociality going on. But when those kids get older and they have to start having some kind of relationship, we might play basketball or we might play baseball, and that means I need to be part of a team and we need to start talking and have a relationship. Those kids will start backing out because they can't do that. They don't know how. That's okay. They don't know how to do that. And they know by the time they get adolescence, or about 8th grade, they know they're different. And they'll tell you that they're different. And they'll tell you that they don't understand why nobody wants to talk to them. And they don't know how to do it either. This same kid who quit going to school, part of the not going to school was his school, they have an auditorium thing once a month with attendance, and if kids have really good attendance, they give them this little certificate, and they have to walk up on stage and get their certificate, which for all intents and purposes is a really good thing, except he's probably got Asperger's, and that's the worst thing in the world for him, to have to walk up in front of all those people. So one of the things I had to do when we tried to convince him to go back to school was to call the principal and say, please don't give him one of those certificates. He starts going to school, please, please, please don't call him up in front. And she really didn't understand. You just can't. Please don't. Okay? He's not going to raise his hand and tell the teacher he doesn't know something, because that means everybody looks at him. So we had to key the teachers into, please, undercover, sometime during the course of the hour, go by his desk and ask him if he understood what was taught today.
How do you know what kind of that?
You don't.
What is Asperger's?
Have you ever watched Parenthood? There's a show on TV on Tuesday nights, and the boy has Asperger's. It's pretty intense.
And it can be intense, but it can also be, like I said, really high level, so we really don't notice it until the child gets to that age where all of a sudden, how come he doesn't have any friends, and why doesn't he want to go to school, and what doesn't? Younger kids, it's very apparent. A lot of Asperger kids will key in on something and know everything about it. I had one kid that knew everything about baseball. You could give him a year, and he could tell you who the players were and who won the series and who, you know, he couldn't do simple math, but that whole area. I knew another kid, railroads was his thing. People with Asperger's tend to make really good computer people, accountants, scientists, because they like to be alone. And they can learn something, but they like to be alone. Leave me alone. So that accountant who learns accounting, if he can close his door and nobody bothers him and he does books by himself, wonderful Asperger profession. The scientist that looks into his microscope all day long, wonderful. Computers. That's just who they are. But it takes a lot of energy to work with these kids because they don't have any social skills and they don't have any filters. Okay? So when Dad says something to him, good example. Got off the bus, he's got a sister. Walked into the house and Dad said, "Where is your sister?" Now that's so where's your sister? That's no big deal. Okay. He ranted in my office for 30 minutes because that was the stupidest thing his dad could ever say. Because she always gets off the bus with me and she's always behind me, and why would he say that? Now, we may think that stuff in our head about people, but the difference with Asperger kids is they speak it. So he's always telling his dad how stupid he is. Now, obviously that causes lots of problems in the house, but he has no filter. You know, we might be at Walmart and see somebody who is dressed inappropriately and might think, you know, why don't you leave the house dressed like that or whatever. He's going to walk up to her and ask her. You know, that's the Asperger kids are very interesting. There's a kid in Glee that supposedly has Asperger's, and she just goes and tells everybody.
I've got twin nieces that they're twin, or our family's really close.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably hadn't said a handful to me their whole life, and they're 15.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I've never seen anything like
Yeah. And that's one of those biological things that just is.
it. It just is.
That just is. And it's, unless somebody in the family recognizes it and sees it as a problem, sometimes what happens in close families is because there's so much support from everybody, we're not thinking about the future. Right now that's probably okay because they're getting fed and they got a roof over their head and, everybody's taking care of them. But God forbid, if something was to happen, how are those two children going to fend for themselves?
Oh, yeah.
How are they going to ask
Right. Well, that's
for
what we're
anything?
thinking now, and
Yeah.
they're also seeing counseling,
Mhm.
big counseling, because that's kind of to the point where we're at right now.
Yeah.
We really don't know what to do.
Yeah. And again, sometimes that's about exposure. It's real hard to tell. If you take kids like that and, you could take them to someone to test them, but if they're not speaking, it's really hard to even assess what's really going on, whether it's developmental, whether it's emotional, it's hard to assess because if they're not talking. So again, that's a situation where I would just immerse those kids into new experiences. And hopefully the light switch goes on, and that's the only, any questions about? It's interesting to read on here because some of you are going through those later stages of development. And it's kind of fun, or maybe you see yourself have missed some of them. You can go back and reclaim them.
Oh, good.
Okay, that's all good news.
Going back.
Let me look here. Ages 8 through 12, with kids that have been in the system, they're dealing with stuff with their parents. What you may start seeing is the grief process begins. Okay? That whole grief process. Now, they don't know it's the grief process. But that whole process of, I'm not at home. My family's not like other families. The intellectual development is on a higher level, and so we're starting to think about who am I and how does that relate to the world. And there's a certain amount of grieving that needs to take place. Okay. I don't know if the pain ever goes away when you grow up in a dysfunctional home. I think the pain changes, and how you look at the pain changes. But to give people false hope that somehow it's never gonna hurt, I think is not real. Okay? There are triggered periods, and you're moving right into them right now. Most of my clients will say if we could, move from October to January, we'd be in really good shape. Because it's hard to go through Thanksgiving when everything on TV gives you this Norman Rockwell kind of image of how holidays are supposed to be. And we're already getting the Christmas stuff. And the reality is, for most people, that has never existed. What we're being sold never existed. And your kids know that. And it hurts. Okay? I consider myself a really, healthy person at this point. I get depressed over Thanksgiving. And I get depressed over Christmas. Because I want that Norman, I still do. I want that Norman Rockwell thing. And I don't have it. Okay? So your kids are feeling that. So expect this time of year for the depression to go up, the behaviors to go up. Expect things to be a little bit rocky. Because that's the way it is. Okay? That's normal. Okay? But those kids who are in that age group are going to start going through the grieving process. And do we know the steps of grief? Are we aware of the steps of grief? We've got denial. So we're going to deny that anything's wrong. Okay? So you may know the complete history about this child's parent, and they're going to deny everything that anybody ever said about it. Okay? We do some bargaining. We bargain with God and with other people. If I do this, then this will happen. Now, what's unfortunate is sometimes DCS plays into that, and it's really cruel to children. Because they say, if your mom does this, this, and this, you get to go home. And then guess what? Mom does this, this, and this, and they're not home. And the kids heard this, and so the only other solution could be, I must have done something wrong, that I'm not going home. I've had little ones in my office tell me that. They know mom has gone to parenting classes. They know mom is clean and sober. They can list off, little bitty ones can list off everything mom's done. And the social worker says that if she does this and this and this and this, I get to go home. And they're not home. So it must be me. It's very cruel. It's a very cruel process. I'm not a big fan. Anger is part of these stages. So we need to be angry. We need to be angry that I have to live with you people. I'm going to be angry that my folks did this stuff to me. I'm going to be angry with the kids I play with. I'm going to be angry with my teacher. I'm just going to be angry. Then we go into sadness. And the last stage of grief is acceptance. And if we don't go through those steps, now we might not do them in the line, but if we don't go through those steps, it hangs on forever. Particularly that sadness thing. Okay? And I know it's really uncomfortable to see people cry and to see kids hurt. It's the best thing for them. Let them hurt. Because when they can do that, then we get to go on to the next step and it's over. But if they don't hurt, they will carry that stuff for years and years and years and years and years. It's just part of the process. We've got to do it. Because that hurt, that sadness that doesn't come out, then turns into severe depression if they don't have an opportunity to experience it. But it's hard. Gosh, it's hard. Especially boys. I don't, and again, that's very sexist, but when I have young boys in my office that are crying, it just tears me up. It's so hard. But I know they have to do it. I know they have to do it. Okay. So where are we? How are we doing for time? Oh, okay. All right. We're going to do
Just make sure it's going.
You wanted some information
Thanks,
about
like-
sexual development. All right. The first thing we need to talk about when it comes to sexual development and what you're going to do about it is you guys need to be really comfortable about the topic of sex. Okay. That's the key. Number one key. If you're not comfortable, you need to get comfortable before you have a discussion with the child about sex. Because they're going to pick up on it. Okay? Sex is very normal, feels good, it's great, we all know that. But for some reason, when the topic of sex comes up, everybody like, what do I do? What do I say? What? Statistically, we know that when a child's been sexually abused, although it's a horrific event and it's awful and all of those kinds of things, the child remembers more how the people in their world responded to it, more than the actual event. I have a 60-year-old woman that I'm seeing. She was sexually abused by her grandfather. She's not crying about the sexual abuse from her grandfather. We processed that. What bothers her, and has bothered her whole life, is when she went and told her mother beat the crap out of her and told her to quit lying. That's what she's traumatized over. Okay? When children go to an adult and say, this is what's happened, if the adult goes, and has a ballistic fit, that's what the child attaches emotionally to. Okay? It's really important if a child says to you, because oftentimes you may be the first people that a person feels safe enough. If a child says to you, starts a story about being sexually abused, there are a couple of things you need to do. One is be cool, don't panic, listen to the story. However, if this is the first, like if there's not a history of this is the first time you're hearing about this, I would not ask any questions. Okay, why is that? Because we don't want to lead a child on. If you're not a forensic interviewer, if you don't have the skills to do it, even me in my therapy office, if a child starts talking about sexual abuse and I don't know anything about it, I'm going to let them tell their story, and then I'm going to call the appropriate people to do the interviewing about it. Does that make sense?
What if they don't want to open up to anybody else?
Well, then again, your job is to listen, but not to ask leading questions. Because sometimes even something like, I don't know, where were you? Or what you're doing then is you're developing a story with the child, and if it comes out that it's going to go into court, a very smart prosecutor could say, you're the ones that created that story. Because you've been talking to this child for X, Y. Now, I'm sure you have a duty to warn here, right? Okay. So unfortunately, if that child says something to you and says, I don't want to talk to anybody else, because he's a child, you're going to have to tell him that you have a duty to warn and you have to call the appropriate authorities. That's just such an awful situation. With adults, you can say, okay, so what do you want to do about this? With kids, you have to, and I don't know, what's your chain of command here? If a child says to him, he gives him a story of abuse and it's not in the file, this is the first time it's happened, would they call you
I
and you
think they would
report?
come to the director, one of us, and then, yeah, and then we'd have to contact DC.
Okay, yeah. Because it's,
Most of the abuse that our kids have had has been exposed before they've gotten here.
right, yeah,
And so,
hopefully.
Yeah.
so
Hopefully.
far,
Yeah.
with what we've,
Boys tend to hang on to sexual abuse with their life. And so I could see that scenario playing out with the men in the group, that at some point a boy who hadn't told before might. I did a parenting group with a bunch of, when I was in Milwaukee, repeat offenders, felonies. And they asked me to do parenting with them. Out of a group of 10 men, 10 of them had been sexually abused. And when I asked them why they had never told anyone, their response was, no one's ever asked. It was as simple as that. That we tend not to ask those questions sometimes of men. We tend to ask more of women. Statistically, 1 out of 4 women in this country will be sexually assaulted. So that's really scary. Okay? And most sexual assault happens by a family member or someone a person knows. It rarely happens by someone they don't. So we're talking date rape or a family member. Never force a child to hug a family member. Ever, ever, ever. I know it happens all the time, but we can't give our kids messages that because a person's a family member, they have to hug and kiss them. They'll come to that conclusion on their own eventually. You know, even though grandma smells funny, they'll do it eventually. But if with kids, you force them to hug family members, you're setting them up for sexual abuse by a family member. Okay. I copied only 1 page for you guys. I gave her, this is a sexual development and behavior. I gave her a bunch of copies of this. If you want to look at the whole thing, you can find out where it is on the website. Gives you lots of information about sexual development, children. One thing I want to make really, really clear. I went to a training last year, and I asked the question, so if you leave kids in a room long enough, and nobody's watching, are they going to figure it out? And the answer was yes. Okay? So just because they're sexually acting out behavior with kids doesn't necessarily mean a child's been sexually abused. We just naturally are very interested in each other's body parts when we're younger, and we can figure out where all those body parts fit. Okay? So those instances where you hear about, you know, kids sexually acting out, it doesn't necessarily mean that one of them's a perpetrator. It's treated that way around here, even with young kids. It's amazing to me how they'll, you know, particularly boys, and again, I don't know if it's because this part of Tennessee is more conservative or whatever, but particularly with boys, they could be 6 or 7 years old, and if they're the person that they were playing with was the same age, they assume the boy is a perpetrator. And that's not necessarily the case. Okay? It probably is more the case that they're being left alone and unsupervised for too long a period of time. Kids will do that. Okay? They'll figure it out. I don't know if you all have memories, but I know I do. My cousins, you know, eventually somebody wants to look down somebody's pants or under somebody's shirt. And unless you've had that pre-education by somebody that says, no, you need to say no, kids are gonna do it. Okay? So it's just really important to know that. So don't automatically assume when there's a sexual history that there's a perpetrator and it's all on purpose. Because the way we think about sex and the way children think about what they do are two different things. I had a family, and again, just really poor supervision going on. Brother and sister, ultimately that's the way they showed affection to each other. But nobody told them it was wrong. And then DCS got involved, and this poor boy has been ostracized and put in a home and shipped away because he's this perpetrator. He wasn't a perpetrator, he loved his sister. But nobody told him it wasn't appropriate. I mean, and I know that sounds odd from our thinking, because we think about sex differently than children do. We also know that even if a child is a perpetrator, if they get help soon enough, they aren't a perpetrator for life. You can teach kids boundaries. So what do we need to do? People need to be able to be in the bathroom by themselves. Okay? Unless you got little bitty ones that you still need to teach how to bathe and stuff, they need to be left alone. And you will find in some of your families, girls, boys, whatever, I've got girls that shower, and while they're in the shower, it's okay for dad to come in and pee. No, it's not. It's just not. But there are a lot of families that do that stuff. We need to set up boundaries in terms of dressing. We get to not, kids may share rooms, but when someone's getting dressed, the other person needs to be, the door needs to be closed, the other person needs to be out of the room, and when they're done, vice versa. Boundaries, 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 boundaries. Not too long ago, I had a young man, so interesting to me. He said the only place he felt safe was in the bathtub when he was younger. And then his dad decided to break down the door and drag him out of the bathtub. This is a 28-year-old boy who can't have any relationships at all. It destroyed him. He was nude. He remembers how embarrassed he was by his father coming in the room. And he was only 7 or 8 years old when this happened. He was terrified. Okay. Let's look at this sheet of paper. Preschool children, less than 4 years old. They're going to explore, and they're going to touch, and they're going to want to show their parts to other kids. This is what they do, okay? Nothing wrong. It's our job, though, to teach them what those boundaries are, okay? So when they're touching themselves in public, you don't scream and holler and yell. You just say, it's okay that you're doing that, but you need to do that in private. Other people aren't supposed to see that. When they pull down their pants and want to show their penis or their vagina, you say, oh, honey, we can't do that in public. You can do that in private. Again, it's all about your reaction to the situation, okay? That'd be good. 4 to 6, if you leave them in a room together, they're going to experiment and they're going to touch each other. So 4 and 6-year-olds, when they play, you need to have eye Let's just, you will avoid all of that stuff, okay? 7 to 12, looking at pictures. And again, you know, this is going to happen, so if you find that Hustler magazine or Playboy magazine with the boys, or even I remember as a girl having slumber parties and us convincing the guy at Walgreens to sell us Hustler, Playboy, and we'd all look at the girl pictures because we knew it was wrong. Okay. Again, it's all about the way you handle it. Okay. Yeah, it's normal to have curiosity. How does it make you feel? Well, guilty. Well, that's going to happen, and you can talk about hormones, and you can do all that kind of stuff. There's lots of children's books about the parts of the body and sex and all of that kind of stuff. Kids need to know the appropriate names of the body. They need to know that the penis is a penis and the vagina is a vagina and the breasts are the breasts. They need to know all that stuff. Because again, God forbid, they end up in court. More cases are thrown out of court because we call it a pee-pee, we call it a wang, we call it a, Freddy, a woo. They need to know what they're talking about. And there's lots of good pictures. Rule of thumb with kids when they ask questions is you answer the question that they've asked and you stop. Okay, so a young child may see, where do babies come from? The baby comes from mommy's tummy. Stop. That may be all the information they're looking for, okay? And they may go and play, and 2 years later, they may come back and say, well, you told me that babies come from mommy's tummy. How does it get in mommy's tummy? And then you might have to do a brief, well, when mommies and daddies love each other, they hug, and then a baby comes, and again, they may be fine with that. They're going to go away. More parents get into trouble by getting technical about stuff they don't need to. Okay? They're just trying to figure the process out. Now, I will say, however, by the age now, probably 10, we should sit down and have a frank discussion and get out the books and show the pictures and, providing a child is emotionally ready, but there are 12 and 13-year-olds that are having sex. So we've got to sit down and give them the basis, the factual information, and then we give them the moral information. So they have both. Okay? I really don't, and there are people that will disagree with me about this. I know that. I don't think the moral information is enough alone. Okay? I mean, it'd be wonderful if we could tell our kids, don't have sex until you get married, and then I'll tell you about it. But the reality is, we've got to protect our kids a little more than that. We've got to give them some information. Guys, with the older kids in your house, and again, I may be overstepping my bounds here, but you got to get the old banana out and buy the condoms, and you got to show them how to do this stuff. Now, just because you're showing them how to do it doesn't mean that you're condoning it. But we've got to help kids know, and there may be rules about whether they can or can't, but we've got to protect our kids. They've got to know. I see young boys that are having sex with girls, and they don't have the clue about safe sex. And they're already having sex. So, and you ask them, What are you gonna do if the baby comes? She's not gonna get pregnant. How do you know she's not gonna get pregnant? And they stare at me like, because they don't have the information. They don't even have the information to have asked her whether she's on the pill. They just assume because they're kids and they're doing it, it's okay. Okay? We've got to give them some information. And sometimes the information scares the bejeebies out of them. Have you ever gone to one of those health department shows on STDs? You're never going to have sex again because they get all the gross pictures. Now, this is what it looks like when you have syphilis. The kids go, and maybe that's good. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
You know, but they need to know all that stuff. Okay. Any questions about sex and kids?
How do you know that, or how do you approach and to know if they're ready? And do you, I mean, because like their ages 9, 13, and 14,
Mm-hmm.
but
Well, I
emotionally
would-
they're not 9, 13, and 14.
Right. But I would definitely sit down with the 13 and 14. Are we talking girls or boys?
Girls.
I would definitely sit down with a 13 and 14-year-old and plan something, and go to the library and get some books ahead of time, or a lot of times the health department has freebies that they will give you, and you need to sit down and talk. Okay. Now, you may want to start with, instead of the sexual body information, you may want to start with the moral information to find out how much they know. Okay. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. I know when my kids were younger, there was a